Hey there and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about how you can auto-generate pages from a collection in the backend. An example for that would be you have a collection of blog posts in Payload CMS and you want to turn them into static NextJS pages automatically. Now, there are two ways of doing this. There is a simple method and there is a more advanced and also experimental method. I'm going to show you both, starting with the simple one. So for the simple one, what we are going to do is first we're going to create a new collection in our project called blog posts. And then we're going to create a new dynamic route in our front end by creating a folder and creating this dynamic route slug.js file, which we already know from the previous video. And this will give us a sort of fixed template file for blog posts. So in this dynamic route, you can basically create a React component which uses the data that you get from the blog posts and renders it. Now this is fixed and can't be really edited in the CMS. The second thing that is fixed is the actual prefix. So in this case, we're going to say blog post. This means if you go to your website, your URL /blog posts /your blog post, that will actually be the prefix for it. And as you can see down here, we will have two collections. We have the pages collection, which we created in a previous video, which can contain the homepage, for example, the recent posts page, which can, for example, show every latest post, the last 10 posts, for example, which has a slug of recent posts, and also a contact page, whatever you want. And then you will have the blog post collection, which will automatically turn into pages, for example, first post, second post, which will have the slug blog post /first post /second post, whatever you call it. Let's start by taking a look at our current project and doing a little bit of setup work. So if we check out our front end, last time we created a very simple homepage, which just consists of two layout blocks. The first one is the hero block, and the second one is the 2-column layout block. In our backend, if we go into our pages collection, you can actually see this page has the slug index, which means it's the index page. And in here, you can see the defined blocks with the heading, the text, and the image. Now I've actually gone ahead and added a little bit of styling to those blocks already, as you can see here, using Tailwind CSS. However, the styles don't really get applied in the front end here. If this happens to you, you'll have to go into your Tailwind config file in the front end. And as you can see here, this specifies the files that Tailwind basically checks for styles, okay? We have the pages, we have the components, and we also have the app directory in the source folder. However, since we are working with blocks and we put them in our blocks folder, they actually don't even get seen by a Tailwind. So what you can do is either just, replace the components or add another path here which says blocks. What you can also do is just create one single import here that basically imports all subfolders of the source directory. Now this should actually do the trick, and if we just restart our front end real quick, yeah, as you can see, just have to, okay, that's a weird error, just give me a second. Okay, apologies for the confusion. I actually just forgot to remove a code snippet from the advanced strategy that I'm going to show you later. So now everything works as expected and you can see these styles are applied. Now, the second thing that we are going to do is introduce rich text. In the previous example, we've just used a normal text area field for the description texts. Now, this is a simple way of handling text. However, in production, you are likely going to use rich text because you will have to enable people to mark something as bold, to use underlines, to add headings, especially in blog articles. This is very important. The first thing that we're going to do is actually swap out the rich text editor that we're going to use in Payload. Now, starting with Payload version 2, you actually have the ability to choose between the rich text editor that you want to use. There are two of them right now. The first one is the Slate editor, which is sort of the old standard one. And the new one is the lexical editor, as you can see right here. Now, the only thing you have to do to get the lexical editor going is you'll have to install the lexical rich text editor, which can be done by running npm install @payload CMS rich text lexical. Okay, I've already got it installed. Now, the second thing that you have to do is, what you're going to find here is the Slate editor. Okay, so this is how it will look for you. The only thing that you have to do is get rid of this Slate editor and actually doing lexical editor. It should probably auto import it. And that's everything you have to do to use this new editor. In order to use the rich text in the front end and to actually display it correctly, we'll have to create a few more files and install 2 libraries. I'm just going to paste the command in here. What we're going to install is, first of all, a library called escape HTML, which can basically make sure that the HTML is valid and also not dangerous. The second thing is React icons. This is not necessary, but for the checklists, which you can check, we're actually going to use icons from the React icons library. So we're just going to install it right now. Just going to restart the front end. Next up, in our front end repository, let's go to utils and create 2 new files. The first one is called serialize lexical rich text. I'm just going to paste the code in here because this is quite a lot of code. What this function does is it basically turns our JSON data, which is rich text, into React readable components. Okay, so as you can see here, for example, if the node format is bold, it will basically render a React tag, a strong React tag. Okay, you don't have to worry about this code. I will actually put it down in the description so you can just copy and paste it. This is a simple serializer. It should have the most important things that you need, but definitely not all. So you can basically go ahead and extend it however you want. The second file that we have to create is called rich text parser. Now what this does is it's basically a simple React component that I'm just going to copy paste here as well. Basically just a wrapper for our function here. Okay, so what it does is it allows you to use this serializing function within a React component very easily, as I'm going to show you in a second. In order to showcase this new rich text, what I'm going to do is create a third block. We currently only have 2 blocks, the hero block and the 2-column block. And I'm just going to create a third block called simple rich text. Now in the backend, this is pretty straightforward. We just export the configuration slug simple rich text. We can give it labels. And the important part is, and the only thing that we need as a field, sorry, it's sometimes quite hard to type and explain at the same time. But the only thing that we're going to add is a field called body, which has the type rich text. And in the front end, we're going to create this block as well, simple rich text .jsx. And now we will just use this body that we get as a prop in this component. So I'm just going to add a little bit of padding, and this is where we will use our rich text parser the first time. We're just going to say rich text parser, and as the content, we're going to specify the body. This should basically work out of the box. The only thing left to do is add the new frontend block into our block list file so that it can actually be used. Simple rich text. As you can remember, this needs to be the slug of our block in the backend. So this one here. And it should be mapped to our block in the front end, which is also called simple rich text, but with an uppercase letter. Now let's add this rich text block to our website and see if it works so far. For this, I'm going to go into our backend, refresh the page so that it displays our new block. I'll have to log in again. And below our two blocks, let's add, see, we forgot to actually add the block to the backend. We added it to the front end, but forgot to add it to the backend. Now for that, we'll have to go into pages. And as you can see here on the layout, we have our blocks and we only imported our two ones. So here we have to say simple rich text as well, and then restart the server. If we now go back to our backend and add a new block, the simple rich text block should appear with our new rich text editor. So let's say we're going to add an H1. This is an awesome heading. Hello world. And we're just going to mark the world as bold and the hello will be underlined. If we go ahead and save it and go back to our page, we should now, well, we don't see it. Why don't we see it? And again, it was due to an old code snippet that I didn't remove. Sorry for that. Now, as you can see here, our third block, which we added in the backend, now appears in the front end with a proper heading, a underlined text, and a bold text. So let's dive into creating our blog posts, starting with a new collection, which will be called blog posts. I'm going to paste in the configuration here, but it is very simple. You have the slug blog posts with the labels. It is very important that you set the access roles to read, which is an arrow function that always returns true. By default, Payload only allows you to see a collection if you're logged in as a Payload user. However, this doesn't make any sense if you're if you want to publish it on a website, because anyone should be able to see your blog post, right? We have three fields here. The first one is the title or the heading. The second one is the slug, which is also very important. As I've mentioned, it's the part in the URL that gets shown. And the third one is our body, which is rich text. To use this collection, we're going to have to add it to our payload config. So I'm just going to go into here and say blog posts. Now, if we restart our server and wait a few seconds, the new collection should now show up in our dashboard. Yep, right here. I've actually already prepared two blog posts that are very simple, have a title, a slug, and a body. Hey, this is really fun, but it's a lot of work. Just basic rich text. In order to turn those blog posts into static pages, what we're going to do now is in our pages directory, we're going to add a new folder and name this blog posts. The important part is this folder name is actually the prefix of your blog posts. So if you call it test, then you will access your blog posts at your domain /test/ whatever. So I'm just going to create this folder, and in this folder we will create our dynamic route, which is called square brackets ... slug.js or JSX. The difference to the other one is that it only has one square bracket. So in this dynamic route, we can basically now, I'm just going to have to change the name, blog post. This will now be our template that turns the data that we get from a blog post into a React component. So in this component, we actually have access to our title, to our slug, but we don't need it, but also to our body. I'm just going to make it very simple. I'm just going to render an H1 with the title, but then I'm not going to use this one. I'm just going to use our rich text parser and set our content to the body. And I have to close it off here. I'm just going to add a little bit of padding to make it a bit more readable. In order for this page to work, we need to add and export two functions, getStaticPaths and getStaticProps, which you might be familiar with from our last video. The job of this first getStaticPaths function is to fetch all blog posts from the API. I've just set a limit to 1000. You can set it lower if you want. However, it's important that you actively set a limit, because if you don't set it, the default limit is 10. This has caused a lot of issues for us in the past that we didn't think about this implicit limit. And yeah, we got confused because only 10 blog posts showed up. So keep that in mind. With those blog posts, it basically just maps those posts and returns the slug, which is then given to our next function, the getStaticProps function, which I'm going to paste in here as well. This takes in the slug and again just fetches this specific blog post, okay? So it queries the blog post where slug equals and then this specific slug. And then it just returns the blog posts in our props. And if you paid close attention, I actually made a mistake here because I just destructured our properties here, which isn't quite correct. So here we actually only get the blog post prop. So I'm going to say blog post, and now I'm going to destructure it into title and body. If we check out our front end, this should basically work right out of the box. So if I go to blog posts, first post, it should show me our post. Okay, I'm getting the error that Axios is not defined because I forgot to import it, which makes sense. And now I'm getting another error, okay? So it complains that the parameter, the slug, was not provided as an array, but as a string, which NextJS doesn't accept here. So this slug is a string that is given to getStaticProps. So the simple solution for that is we're just going to put it in an array here, and that should do the trick. Yeah, as you can see, we have our heading here, which is sort of small because we didn't style it, but below that is our rich text. Now, if we go to our second post, we should see that one as well. And there it is, with the working rich text heading, strike through, underline, italic, and bold text. And that's about it for the simple method. Now, the drawbacks of this method are pretty obvious. As you can see here, we can only change the aesthetics of our blog post and the structure and the content that is shown within the code. So an editor in our CMS couldn't really change how blog posts are displayed or wouldn't have the full flexibility. So let's say I want to make the title larger, or I want to make it disappear completely. I would have to go into the code and remove it here, and then it would actually remove it in the front end. The second thing that is fixed here is the prefix, blog posts, because this is our folder name and we can't change it dynamically. In order to make this fully flexible, we will have to do a little bit more complex work that I'm going to explain to you right now. A short word of caution in advance. This approach is a bit experimental and pretty new for us as well. So I wouldn't recommend just using it straight in production, but just experimenting with it, extending it and adjusting it to your needs, and maybe it's an interesting approach to think about. So here's what we're going to do. We're not only going to create a blog post collection, but in addition to that, we're going to create a page templates collection. The idea behind that is the blog posts contain the data, and the page templates are converters. They basically take the data and convert it into a layout, which we can then render as a page. So for that to work, we actually only need to edit our existing dynamic route and adjust it so that it doesn't only fetch our pages from the backend, but also the page templates. In the second step, for every template, what we're going to do is fetch all relevant documents from the data collection. So in this case, it could be our blog posts data collection, and then add them to the pages array by using placeholders and replacing values, so that in the end we get a large array which consists of, first of all, our standard pages, but then also our page templates that turned all of our blog posts into a page template, which is then rendered as a page as well. It might sound a little bit complex, but I'm going to show you how we can do it in a second. We're going to start by creating our page templates collection. So in our backend, we go into collections, page templates. Sorry, I created a folder, page templates.js. I'm going to paste in our collection config. It's pretty straightforward. We have a slug, page templates, labels, same access rules. Now we're going to get to the endpoint in a second, but as fields, we have a field called attributes helper, which I'm going to explain as well. Then we have the name, which is just for internal purposes, a slug, which is important because this field actually determines the slug that this page template will have, for example, blog posts. Okay. Then we added a select field for the template collection that we can apply to this, the data collection that we can apply to this template. So in our case, we do have two collections. However, the only collection that really makes any sense here is the blog posts collection. And the value has to equal the slug of the data collection. And last but not least, we have our layout. This is the same thing as in our pages, and we have to re-import all the blocks that we want to use here again, which I'm just going to do right now. Just going to say hero, which should auto import 2-column and the simple rich text, our 3 blocks. Moving on with our get collection schema handler. This is an endpoint that will actually help us to retrieve the structure of our blog posts. Because if we want to turn them into a page, we will have to know what attributes a blog post has. So in this case, we need to know it has a title and it has a body so that we can use it. In order to create this endpoint, what I'm going to do first is create a subfolder just for structural purposes, call it page templates, and move our collection config in here. Now I'm going to add a second folder here called handlers. And in this folder, we're going to add our, how was it called, get collection schema handler. The code for it is very simple. It's basically just a simple express middleware, which takes in request and response. It gets the collection from the request parameters, and it just returns the fields that it gets from the payload configuration object, which is contained in every single request. Now we only have to import it here because it hasn't really been imported correctly. Just going to rely on auto import as well. The second custom thing that we need, we don't really need it, but it improves the user experience a lot, is our attributes helper. That's how I called it. This is, in simple terms, a front-end component which is shown in our admin panel, which lets us know what attributes a blog post has and lets us know if we are already using it in our template or not. To create it, I'm going to add a second folder. I'm just going to name it UI because it's in the admin panel. And in that one, I'm going to create attributes helper.jsx and paste in our code. As I said, you will find this code in the description. What it does is it basically calls this simple endpoint and gets back all the fields that a collection has. And then it renders those fields, and it also checks by retrieving the current form data in our admin panel. It checks whether we are already using this field or not. This is the theory. You are later going to see it in action, which will make it pretty simple. Now I just have to import it here as well, and then we should actually be good to go. If we go into our backend, we should actually see a new collection popping up. Again, we obviously need to add it to our payload config, page templates. If we refresh the page again, we should see our page templates popping up here. I've actually gone ahead and created one already, but I'm going to delete it and we're going to create a fresh one. So we're going to name it blog posts because we want to turn our blog post collection into blog posts. The slug will be blog posts. Let's call it blog post dynamic to make it clear that it's dynamic. And as the collection, we're going to choose blog posts. And this is our little attribute helper popping up here. As you can see, this shows us the different attributes that our blog post has. The important to our title and body, but you can also see it has created, adds, updated, add any slug. Now, here is how the magic happens. We can now easily create a simple layout just as we would for pages. I'm just going to choose the hero block here. And now we some sort of have to add those values into our field. And for that, we're going to use something called EJS placeholders. You can basically use whatever you want. I just went for the EJS placeholders ones because I think they're very straightforward. They go like this. And then you have to specify your attribute name. In this case, it is title. And then you just have to close it off again. Okay. So this is now our heading. Let's keep it that simple. And as you can see here, it gets marked green to let us know that we have used this variable. Click on save, and now we should be good to go. Before those page templates are now shown in the front end, we will have to do some changes there. First of all, I'm going to delete our simple approach here, just so that they don't get in touch with each other. And what we have to do now is adjust our dynamic route here. Now this will look a little bit complicated, but we have to replace our getStaticPaths and getStaticProps, or more or less extend it. So the new code for the getStaticPaths is a lot more complex because there's a lot more things that we actually have to get done. I'm going to walk you through it right now. The first step is fetching all the pages, as in the simple version. However, now in addition, we are also fetching all the page templates from the backend. After that, we iterate through every page template, and for every page template, we actually fetch all the data from the data collection that we specified in the template. So as you can see here, we specified the blog posts collection, and this is what we're fetching here. So we're fetching all blog posts. And now for every blog post, we actually go through the layout and we replace, and this is what we're using here, this regex basically looks for those EJS placeholders, and we replace those titles by the actual value of this blog post. So if we had title written here, we're actually going to replace this title with the actual title of the blog post. There's one special case here. If we have a rich text, we actually have to replace the entire value, because if you just put, let's add our simple rich text block here. If you just put, for example, the body in here and click on save, this actually gets saved as rich text as well, because it's a rich text field, right? Here, and it's only in this text attribute. So that's why we have to replace the entire thing with the actual rich text value from the blog post. Okay. If you do have any questions about this and you're having a hard time understanding it, I absolutely understand. Just feel free to reach out. We will be happy to help out. As you can see here, I made a mistake. The body is not green. So I actually have to swap out those two signs, and now the body should be green as well. After it has swapped out the placeholders, it's actually saving those pages that it generated to a file called pages.json. This is so that it's easier to give the data to the next function, the getStaticProps function. Okay, so those pages basically contain all the actual pages with their layout, but also all the page templates that generated pages with the populated layout. It's what I call it, basically the layout with those placeholders replaced. Now the second function that we have to add is getStaticProps. So what this does, it's actually very simple again. It just takes the slug. So in here we return all the slugs of all the pages. And as you can see, the slug of those page template is generated dynamically as well, depending on what slug we specified in our template file here. Okay. So the getStaticProps function only reads from the pages file, which is in here. It finds the specific page with the slug and actually returns the page data. And with that page data that we can actually retrieve in our block at the top, we just put it into our render blocks function that works for the normal pages as well. And within the page, we have the layout, and that will render all the dynamic blocks that we have. So that should basically be it. Now, if we go back into our front end, save this again, as you can see, the old blog posts disappeared. But if we go to blog posts, dynamic, and then first post, as you can see, our blog posts are shown, and they are shown within our specified layout blocks. Now, if I want to go ahead and change things up a little bit, I can actually move those blocks around, and now our hero block is below our rich text block. So if I click save, this should actually update. Yeah, this should actually update, and now the rich text block is above our hero block. Same thing for our slug. So if we want to change it back to, let's say, blog posts, okay. Now, if I refresh here, it should actually disappear, page not found. But if I go back to just blog posts, there it is again. So this way allows your editor in the CMS to actually move things around and use the same layout blocks that he uses for the dynamic pages to also render specific data collections into pages. And that will be it for today's video. As I've mentioned, this approach is pretty experimental right now. It hasn't been really tested, but take it as an interesting thought, and maybe you can adjust it, extend it to your own needs, and make Payload CMS fully flexible. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to give us feedback. We highly appreciate any feedback that you can give us, or if there are any topics that you would like to cover us, that you would like us to cover. That's how it goes. Feel free to let us know as well, and we will happily create a video about it. Apart from that, take care and see you in the next one.